vegan hip-hop movement. Alas, here with none other than
Jared Paul.
Jump right into it, like if you wouldn't mind just sharing your story with regards to veganism, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I grew up in a pretty apolitical family, very apolitical, French-Canadian, Catholic, pretty working class, poor, very poor actually, about as poor as you can grow up without being in poverty. But we always had all the things that we needed and most of the things that we wanted. Very, very traditional French-Canadian meat-based diet. And I had heard KRS-One's song, Beef, but I had never really questioned my diet too much until I went to University of Rhode Island. Sage Francis took me to my first ever poetry reading, and it was amazing for me because I had never been at an event like that where there were so many young folks empowered to just tell their story. People doing political anti-war poems, poems about love, about loss, about survival, about heritage, culture, all this stuff. I had never heard folks do that. I grew up, you drank, you smoked, you raised hell. We had fun. I'm not trying to say I don't respect or love the people I grew up with, but we never sat around reading poems, So here was this event loaded with folks my age, sharing these ideas, and were confident and were, many of them, well-researched. And University of Rhode Island Students for Social Change, instead of having a poetry feature that night, they had a workshop and presentation on factory farming and what a factory farm was. And I just was blown out of the water. I literally couldn't believe it. I was already opened in this new way by hearing all this poetry, this living embodiment of the oral tradition that I didn't even know existed, and then to be hit with this very clear, direct presentation on what was happening on these huge corporate farms where the animals were tortured, literally tortured, and in the process, the earth, the topsoil was destroyed, groundwater was poisoned, the air was polluted, rivers and streams were being polluted from the waste dump off. And I mean, it was obviously propaganda to a point, but in the movement, I believe in the term propaganda. There's a difference between lying, deceitful, destructive propaganda and propaganda that's accurate, propaganda that's opinionated but based on fact. And whether I had time to research the handouts and the pamphlets that they had, they played a video and showed slides and pictures of stuff that's undeniable. You can't edit or doctor up a cow with its throat slit, hanging upside down in a chain, still blinking and still alive. There's no way that you can couch that or frame that that was taken out of context. At a certain, things can be taken out of context for sure, but at a certain base level, there's some things that it doesn't matter what context they're in, they're just wrong. Watching the chickens in the cages, 20 chickens stuffed together in a pen the size of a closet, and then countless of those closets going off and into infinity, and these enormous, vast industrial warehouses. You couldn't make it up. It was there. The proof was there. And that night I had the opposite of a nervous breakdown. I had a nervous awakening. I knew that my mother would never feed me food if she knew that that's where it came from. And my parents are smarter than me. I believe in my parents. I love my parents very much. And it was obvious to me right away that they for sure did not know about this. And if my parents who were that smart and who had advocated for me all my life didn't know, then who else didn't know? I gave myself 2 weeks to research what I saw in those videos and the pamphlets that they had, and do some background checks and compare other articles. And as I feared, it was true. And after that time, I went vegan. And I haven't looked back since. It's been 17 years. But I shouldn't say that I haven't looked back, because I am constantly assessing and reassessing where I'm at and where the sustainable farm movement is at, etc. Because you know, I don't view omnivores as the enemy. I don't view small sustainable. I don't, you know, the term ethical is debatable, but I guess I would say conscience based, conscious focused small farms, because we know some of the small farms are worse than some of the big farms. There's some small meat farms where the animals are treated as bad, or certainly worse in some instances, than the factory farms. I'm not talking about that. There are some small local farmers where the animals live with dignity until they die. And for me, that's a universe apart from what's happening in the factory farms. So I don't view those omnivores as the enemy or as people who we shouldn't build with. And I believe, honestly, small, ethical, conscious-based, conscious-focused farmers are leading the charge in many areas that a lot of vegan folks aren't. I don't think if it was up to the vegan movement, we wouldn't know about Monsanto, maybe, the way we do. We might not know about Cargill and Tyson and GMOs and how it's all tied in if it weren't for the sustainable farm movement. You know, but I have been vegan in continuous succession for 17 years from that point until now.
Word. And what you were saying, like the last piece, makes me think of the difference between ABCs for Roger, like the original version, and then of course there was an update, right, that spoke to some of these issues. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or?
Sure. You know, building off of what I said a moment ago, and I mean, there's a lot of hardline vegan folks who are, you know, would find it sacrilegious, and I respect that. I don't want people to bend their views or change the way that they think based on what I think, or I'm not lobbying for folks to shift their views. After 17 years of doing this, I can only speak from my own experience and what I know and what I've been through. And for instance, I have a friend of mine who is almost full First Nation, almost full Native American from Northern California, and he grew up hunting. And the way that he was raised, anything that they shot, they had to eat. Anything. And that's what, you know, his father told him growing up. You know, he didn't want them, you know, he wanted them to practice shooting on targets, not on animals. And if they went out to hunt, if they hit something, that's what it was for. It was for, not for sport, it was for food only. And that's how he was raised. And he hunts. He's able to, he doesn't hunt often, but, you know, he takes down a deer a year and is involved in the process. Uses almost the whole animal, sees that it's buried, actively rats out hunters who he catches hunting out of season or poaching or breaking laws, and refuses to hunt with people who kill for sport. And there's mad vegan people who are watching this right now who might flip out, you know, to hear me say that this dude is an ally or a friend of mine or whatever. But for me, that's the reality, is that, you know, First Nation folks and Native American folks, indigenous folks around the world have been living in perfect harmony with the ecosystem for 1 million years. If folks can hunt and kill the animal themselves, and the animal lives with dignity, I don't think it's much different than a lion going out and killing a gazelle. I think it's pretty much the same. For me, that's not what I want to do. That's not what I'm doing. But I don't see this dude as my enemy. I don't see the small farmers who, you know, I have a friend of mine in Oregon who has a huge garden in their backyard, and they're not vegan or even vegetarian. But like 80% of their diet is vegetables that they grow themselves and get from farmers market. They eat a tiny bit of chicken and a tiny bit of fish. And their whole backyard, they have chickens. They don't eat their chickens, but they get eggs from their chickens. And their chickens have a whole backyard to run around in. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's not like I'm making it up. So I'm not trying to like spend a big part of this interview putting shine on omnivores or sustainable meat eating. I'm only going through that to say that for me, it's not an, you know, I'm not down with absolutisms. I'm not down with making enemies out of people who are working class and who are trying to do the right thing in their own right. I think that vegan folks, vegetarian folks, folks who style themselves as sustainable, ethical omnivores, I think we should all be working together, because capitalism is literally destroying the earth, literally. Industrial capitalism, corporate globalism, the ruling class, the 1%, whatever you want to call it, the actions, the course that they're setting us on is destroying the earth all around us. And we see it every day. How many oil spills in Virginia or Illinois or Wisconsin? How many, you know, in the Gulf, in the tar sands, in Ecuador, you know, in Chile? How many times how many more oil spills do we have left before it's a normal, regularly occurring thing? I hear that stuff now and it's not even shocking anymore. There's so many oil spills happening, and we have to be conscious of that. You know, I don't want to buy soy products from 3,000, 4,000 miles away. I don't want to buy soy products from a farm that clear cut a couple million acres of land for that. How many animals, how many species, you know, in that area are wiped out so that I can have tofu, so that I can have tempeh, so that I can have a fancy meat alternative. And again, I'm not on this bullshit, like I'm not souped. I've looked at the data and looked at the different surveys. I know that when fools come out with this logic being like, well, if you're worried about forests being clear cut for cattle ranches, you should check yourself, because forests are also cut for soy. I know the numbers. It's a much smaller amount for soy. It's way more for these huge, you know, feedlots that they're making for, you know, livestock and all this other shit. I know that. But at the same time, you know, capitalism has already co-opted veganism, just like it co-opted anything that can make it money. When I started doing this in 1997, you couldn't find a veggie burger on the menu almost anywhere. You couldn't find soy milk in a store. And capitalism will fight you. They think it's going to hurt them. They'll fight you and fight you. It will fight you and fight you until it can make money off of you. And then boom. You know, there's Silk soy milk everywhere you look, at every restaurant. And Silk was owned by a huge dairy company. It used to be owned by, you know, Dean Foods.
Exactly.
I don't want to give money to Dean Foods, you know. I can't justify that. So it's complex. I believe in regional systems. I believe in getting as much of my food from within 50 to 100 miles of where I live as possible. And I think that that's how we're going to stop capitalism. I don't think what I'm working for is going to happen in my lifetime, but that doesn't make it any less worth fighting for or less valuable. And growing capitalism out from underneath itself, because it's getting so top-heavy. It's going to fall over eventually. You know, I don't know if folks who are watching this right now play poker, but for me it's a perfect analogy. If you sit down and play poker with 11 people, you start off with there's only a finite amount of chips. And I mean, the Fed can print money, whatever, so that's a variable, but for the most part, there's a finite amount of money. Capitalism is not about equality or justice or basing your system on the needs of the people or the environmental limitations of a region. All it's about is the wealthiest people advocating for themselves, and whatever choices happen as a result of them doing what it takes to make the most money. That's why I think that capitalism is chaos. It's economic chaos. They want to say that about anarchy and socialism, etc., but it's really, that's what, to me, economic chaos is capitalism. But to the poker analogy, that's what capitalism is, that's what it does. There's that finite amount of money, and every year is like a hand that goes around the table. Capitalism is the dealer that sees how everybody bets. You know, it's the devil on the shoulder. And you have all these players sitting at the table. And every year, a certain number of the players get knocked out, and the chips get consolidated in fewer and fewer hands. And it's going to go around the table, and so many people are going to get knocked off and knocked off. The middle class is shrinking into a puddle. And eventually, that money is not even just going to be in the hands of a select few, 10, 20 companies. It's going to be in the select few of 5 companies or 3 companies, and it won't be sustainable. It's going to fall over. It can't run like that. And so it's our job to make the most responsible choices that we can, to get in where we fit in, to find the causes that we're the most passionate about, to join those movements, not overextend ourselves, but to be productive within the few campaigns that we can join and grow capitalism out from underneath itself. And I think that eating regionally and eating responsibly is a huge part of that.